We've been discussing finding purpose, finding meaning the last couple of days, and I want to read you a quote from Robert Heinlein, a writer. Don't handicap your children by making their lives easy. Uh, and that, I think we all can understand that. Civilization is very delicate. If it's not united in its outlook with a common purpose and a common meaning, then it can easily collapse. You can have debate within that civilization about where you are going, what you want to do, what you want to accomplish, and primarily I think we've been fairly successful at that. I guess Western civilization has been dominant for about 500 years, not totally, but in that time, and in that time frame, the United States has become, especially in the last 100 or so years, the dominant player in that, and the world is better off. But there were standards that everyone, not everyone, but the people who wanted to get anywhere had to adhere to, and even the so-called elite at that time made things difficult for their children. The prep schools in this country that are famous for the preppies and the Ivy League clothing and whatnot, but for a long time they were very hard on their students and their mode of dress and their academic achievement and their athletic achievement. They were pushed, and that was hard on some people, but overall they were made to adhere to a standard, and that standard was set forth by achievement. And what we've done is primarily, I guess, starting in the 60s when the phrase "if it feels good, do it" started gaining prominence. We've kind of been on a slide. Everybody makes fun of the "everybody gets a trophy" thing, and there's something behind that. I remember when one of my grandsons, I guess he was playing t-ball one summer, and I was there, and a gentleman came up to me, and he was, you could tell he was a hard-working man. And there's a big mill near where we were. He probably worked there. But anyway, he walked up, and we were standing there watching the boys miss the t-ball, the ball on the tee. And he said, "Well, what's the score?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. There is no score. They don't keep score." And he said, "Well, that's crazy." He said, "I guarantee you those kids know what the score is." So afterwards, when the game was over, I asked my grandson and said, "What was the score?" He knew. It was pretty, of course, then they were just running bases, and that was part of the thing, and younger athletics for my own son. And my daughters had, well, that's not true. I had twin daughters. They had no interest in athletics whatsoever. But then the second child was a swimmer. And that was very competitive, and very, they were pushed really hard, and which I think has been good for her. When my son was coming along, he played soccer for one season, couldn't stand it, and then he was pretty much into baseball, and then later football and basketball. But the thing is that was about the time they started giving everybody a trophy. And I remember when he was playing in an athletic association in elementary school, the kids, by rule, even if they didn't come to practice, they had to be able to play on game days. And kids wouldn't show up to practice, and we'd have to, I was an assistant coach, and we would have to play them. And they didn't know what they were doing, didn't really care. but they got a trophy. But the kids that really cared, the trophy didn't really mean anything because they, if you came in third or fourth or fifth or whatever place, and after a while, I think they even quit denoting that. You won a championship, but everybody else, it was primarily a participation thing. And I noticed that in my daughter and in the swimming and my son, when they won, those trophies were the ones that went up in their rooms, and just the ones that they were given were kind of discarded. And I think that started happening in schools too. I remember reading even places like Harvard and Yale and Princeton and Brown and the Ivy League, which was the height of academic achievement. I remember so many years ago reading how the grades were sliding, and what used to be the gentlemanly C became an A. And there was one particularly famous professor at Harvard who, if you got a B, was really an A in any other class. So we have a lot of people with Harvard degrees who were not held to the standard of previous times, and so forth. And again, I mentioned yesterday how people are super proud of getting a high school diploma, but I remember my sister sent me a test, I believe it was for 8th graders in the 1930s, and there were college graduates that couldn't answer some of those questions and whatnot. I remember, and I mentioned this history course I took yesterday, the final exam consisted of 3 questions, but the question I remember the most, it was an essay test, and the guy didn't believe in multiple choice. And the first question was, what was the effect of the Transcontinental Railroad upon the Republican Party and the economy of the United States? And we had blue books, and you were, where you would fill those out and answer those questions. But and he read your answers and so forth. So you had to know something about what was going on in the country at the time that was completed, and what it took, and how it happened, and the whole thing. But that's being held to a standard, and so therefore you kind of know what happened before. I remember when I was in business, part of an outreach for the business community, and it was a major city, is we would go around on given days, and they would have panels of businessmen. It was primarily men at the time, and we would answer questions from high school students. And one student, I remember, and this happened more than once, but in this particular instance, was irate that he had to study history, because he was like, what's that got to do? Because today we have crime in the streets and drugs and corruption in politics and so forth and so on. And my answer was, well, don't you think that's happened before? And wouldn't it be nice if you kind of knew how the people in the past addressed that problem? And we kind of went into a discussion on that. But the thing is you have to have standards, and if you don't have standards, and nobody knows what they're doing or how to get anywhere. And this, we go back to the old math and English. And my first essay that I wrote in college was in what they then called rhetoric and composition class. It was a freshman class. And I thought of myself as a fairly decent writer, and I wrote an essay and got it back, and it looked like it had bled to death with all the corrections and whatnot. And the thing is you had to learn to present your points and your ideas and across and in the written format, and because of things like this, which are great, but a lot of people don't do that. And they're not required to think things through. I mean, if you can write a coherent sentence and follow that with other sentences that make a pardon me, a paragraph, and get your idea across, then you've done a fairly good job. But many of us can't do that today. At one point, and I don't know if this is still the case, but we had what we called investment committees, and you had to present in written format and then follow it up in a question and answer with the wise old men what you were trying to do. And if they were going to invest in what you were presenting, you had to really put it across, and it was up to you. And if you couldn't do that, then you didn't get, the deal wasn't done. And even if it was a good deal, it didn't matter, because they were very busy people and you had to present it to them. And it was a limited, but anyway, and there were ways of doing that, and if you could fall in that format and so forth. But the thing is and I don't want to get into the whole dressing thing and all that, but it is important, and we'll talk about that later. How much time do I have left? But standards are important. It's academic standards, business standards, athletic standards. And at one time, going back to the trophy thing, coaches were hard on you. You had to adhere. And I know that sometimes they could get overly hard, and I understand that. But the thing is if you wanted to achieve, I remember one year I was in the 10th grade on a football team that was picked by the newspapers and so forth, to win the state championship. A pretty competitive state. And we were, I guess at that time, probably a 4A school, and that's different for different states, but it was a fairly large school. And I remember our coaches just grinded on us, and their thing was, you have got to be, you're picked, and you can't believe the newspapers are going to carry you across that finish line or to that state championship, because every team out there, their dream is to beat you. And most of the time, you're going to have to be good enough and strong enough to go into the fourth quarter. And by the way, life is the fourth quarter, because the fourth quarter is where everything comes. That's the gut-wrenching time. And if you've played sports, you know that. In baseball, it comes down to the bottom of the ninth. If you stayed in the game to the bottom of the ninth, you don't have a time, but you can win or lose a lot of times in that ninth inning. Basketball is the fourth quarter, and so forth. But the thing is you have to be in good enough shape, strong enough, and believe in what you're doing enough to get it across at the end. I remember watching a game. I think it was the first time the Indianapolis Colts ended up going to the Super Bowl. And they had to drive, in the fourth quarter, they had to drive downfield and score a touchdown to win the game. A field goal wasn't good enough. They had to score a touchdown. It was a long drive against, well, it was the Patriots. It was a very strong team. And the satellite camera was on one of the defensive players. He said, "It's okay. It's the fourth quarter. We're running out of time, but our quarterback is money, and it's money time, so we're going to win this game." And they did. But the quarterback was a very disciplined individual. He was very hard on himself. He was a coach on the field, Peyton Manning. And they believed in him, but they believed in him because he held himself and them. You can hold everybody around you to a high standard, and everybody gets better. And you can do that in athletics, and you can do it in business, you can do it in politics. I've just finished reading 2 biographies, one on Franklin Roosevelt, who I don't believe a lot of the things he did was good, but in some ways he was necessary. But he believed in what he did, and he was able to write it down and get it across to other people. And the other was on Alexander Hamilton, who also was a major believer in himself and what he wanted to achieve and what he wanted to do for the country. So those are standards. You have to hold yourself to standards. And if you have no standards, which is what you see a lot of now, because life has been made too easy for us for too long, then we're going to end up going nowhere and we're going to end up falling apart. So life doesn't have to be bad. You can make it better. You can make it better for yourself and those around you if you hold yourself to a high standard. And the civilization is responsible for those standards too. So have a good day and do good things.